Welcome to our deep dive, everyone. Today we're looking at the LA wildfires.
Yeah.
Yeah, a story that's been impossible to ignore this past week.
Yeah, it's been pretty inescapable.
Yeah, it really has. 5 major fires burning across LA County as we speak, and thousands of firefighters working around the clock to try and contain them.
And we're recording this on January 10th, so the situation is still very much developing.
It is, and we'll definitely be keeping our listeners updated as things progress. But, even at this early stage, the destruction is just staggering.
It is. I mean, the Palisades fire in particular has the potential to be one of the most destructive fires in California's history.
It's a sobering thought. And, beyond the headlines and the dramatic images we're seeing, we want to really understand the deeper story here.
Yeah.
What are the factors at play? Why is this happening? And, frankly, why should you, the listener, care about this?
Those are the key questions, and I think a good place to start is with the sheer scale of what we're dealing with.
Right.
I mean, over 20,000 acres have already burned.
It's hard to even picture that.
Thousands of structures have been destroyed.
Reduced to ashes in many cases.
And the insured losses are already estimated to be above $8 billion.
$8 billion. It's just mind-boggling. But obviously the human cost goes far beyond any dollar figure.
Of course. I mean, we have to remember that behind those numbers are real people, real families whose lives have been upended.
At least 10 people have been confirmed dead, and nearly 180,000 residents are currently under evacuation orders.
It's just heartbreaking to think about the fear and uncertainty they're going through. Right now, they don't even know if they'll have homes to return to.
Absolutely. And, even if their homes are spared, there's the long-term impact to consider: the trauma, the disruption to their lives, the economic fallout.
Right. The ripple effects of these fires will be felt for years to come. Think about the impact on industries like tourism and real estate. They're going to be reeling from this.
You're right. It's not just about the immediate damage. So let's try to understand what led to this catastrophe. And one of the key factors everyone's talking about is the Santa Ana winds.
Yeah, those notorious dry winds that seem to plague Southern California every year.
Exactly. I mean, for those who aren't familiar, can you explain exactly how they contribute to these massive fires?
Sure. So imagine a landscape that's already been parched by drought, covered in dry brush and trees.
Okay.
Now picture winds blasting down from the mountains at 60, 70, even 80 miles per hour.
Wow.
That's what we're dealing with here. Those winds suck the moisture out of everything, turning vegetation into basically kindling.
Kindling, just waiting for a spark.
Exactly. And then the winds act like giant bellows, spreading any tiny spark into a raging inferno.
So it's not just that they fan the flames. They actually create the perfect conditions for a fire to explode in the first place.
That's right. And while we're used to the Santa Anas here in Southern California, climate change is making them even more dangerous.
You mentioned climate change as a threat multiplier earlier. Can you elaborate on what you mean by that?
Well, think of it this way. Climate change is like turning up the heat on an already dry and windy landscape. We've had decades of drought in California, which has made the vegetation incredibly dry. And as global temperatures rise, that dryness only intensifies.
So when the Santa Ana's hit, the potential for catastrophic fires is just amplified.
Exactly. And it's not just about the intensity, it's also about the frequency. California's Governor Gavin Newsom recently said, "There's no fire season anymore. It's fire year."
Yeah, that statement really struck me. It highlights the reality that these aren't isolated incidents anymore. We're seeing a shift in the very nature of wildfire risk.
And climate change is a major factor.
But even with these extreme conditions, there's still the question of how these fires actually started
Right.
and how they spread so rapidly.
And whether there was anything that could have been done to prevent them.
Which brings us to the issue of preparedness and response. And there's been quite a bit of controversy surrounding LA's handling of this disaster.
Yeah, there have been some pretty pointed criticisms.
One of the most prominent ones came from President-elect Donald Trump, who publicly criticized the fact that some firefighters' hoses ran dry during the initial response.
And that really sparked a debate, with some fire chiefs denying any problems, while others admitted to experiencing low water pressure at certain hydrants.
Adding to the confusion, an accidental alert was sent to every mobile phone in LA County, which is home to about 10 million people.
Yeah, that was a major snafu, and it raised concerns about the effectiveness of emergency communication systems during a crisis like this.
And then there were the reports that LA's fire department had actually warned about budget cuts, hindering their ability to respond to emergencies.
Yeah, that's been a recurring theme in California for years now.
So we have a complex situation here. Multiple factors at play and a lot of questions about whether enough was done to prepare for this kind of disaster.
It's a crucial question, and one that we need to examine carefully.
But before we get into potential solutions and what the future holds, I want to go back to the question of how these fires actually started.
Right.
What do we know so far about the causes?
Well, investigations are still ongoing, and we don't have conclusive evidence to suggest that any of the current fires were deliberately set.
Yeah.
But we do know that a man was arrested on suspicion of starting a new fire separate from the 5 major ones we've been discussing,
Oh, wow.
which highlights the unfortunate reality that human actions, whether intentional or not, can play a role in sparking these disasters.
Right. It's a sobering reminder that even a small oversight or a careless act can have catastrophic consequences, especially in these dry and windy conditions.
Remember the devastating campfire in Northern California back in 2018? Faulty electrical transmission lines sparked that blaze, which destroyed the town of Paradise and tragically killed 85 people.
It seems like we're dealing with a perfect storm of contributing factors here. The Santa Ana winds the dry conditions, the potential for human error, and the underlying impact of climate change.
It's a complex interplay of forces, and one that we need to understand more fully if we want to prevent these kinds of tragedies from happening again.
And that's what we're going to explore in more depth in the next part of our deep dive. So it really feels like we're at a crossroads here, with all these factors converging. But amidst all the destruction and uncertainty, there is a glimmer of hope, isn't there?
Well, there is some good news. The fire weather outlook for Southern California has been downgraded from extremely critical to just critical.
Okay, so that suggests that the most extreme fire conditions might be easing a bit.
Yeah, it seems like the strongest gusts of those Santa Ana winds have passed.
That's encouraging. But I know our BBC weather forecaster, Sarah Keith Lucas, has also said that there's no rain in the forecast for at least the next week.
Right, so the risk of new fires or existing fires flaring up is definitely still a concern.
Absolutely. So even if all the current fires are contained, the impact of this disaster is going to continue to be felt for a long time.
Oh, absolutely. The recovery process is going to be long and challenging, both for individuals and for entire communities.
And this brings us back to a question we posed at the beginning. Why should you, the listener, care about these fires?
Yeah, I mean, it may seem like a distant event to some people, but these fires represent a larger trend that has far-reaching implications.
So what are those implications? What's the bigger picture here?
Well, I think these fires are a wake-up call to the growing threat of wildfires, not just in California, but in many parts of the world.
So it's not just a local issue.
No, it's a global issue,
No.
and it underscores the urgent need for action on climate change.
And for increased investment in wildfire prevention and mitigation strategies.
Absolutely. And also for greater awareness of individual responsibility when it comes to fire safety.
You've touched on the need for adaptation and mitigation. So what are some specific steps that cities like Los Angeles can take to better protect themselves from these increasingly frequent and intense wildfires?
Well, we need to be thinking about this from multiple angles. Urban planning and building codes are crucial.
Okay.
Are we designing and constructing homes and communities in a way that minimizes fire risk?
So thinking about fire safety from the ground up.
Exactly. Are we using fire-resistant building materials? Are we creating defensible spaces around structures?
So it's not just about fighting fires when they break out. It's about reducing the risk of them starting and spreading in the first place.
Precisely. And that also means looking at forest management practices.
Okay.
Are we doing enough to reduce fuel loads in forest and wildland areas? Are we implementing controlled burns to strategically remove dry brush and create fire breaks?
So managing the land in a way that makes it less susceptible to these massive fires.
Exactly. And then there's the question of early warning systems.
Right. Can technology play a role in helping us better predict and prepare for these fires?
Absolutely. We're seeing advancements in weather forecasting and fire modeling that can help us better anticipate fire behavior and potential risks.
That's encouraging.
We also need to look at how we can improve emergency communication systems
Wow.
to ensure that residents are getting timely and accurate information during a fire emergency.
Okay, so there's a lot that can be done on a larger scale. But what about on an individual level? What can our listeners do to protect themselves and their homes?
There are several things that individuals can do to make their homes and communities more fire resistant. Clearing brush and debris away from structures is crucial.
Okay.
Creating a defensible space of at least 100 feet around your home can significantly reduce the risk of fire damage.
So basically creating a buffer zone.
Right. And using fire-resistant landscaping materials.
Choosing plants that are less flammable.
Exactly. And spacing them appropriately can make a big difference.
Makes sense.
And of course, being mindful of fire safety practices is essential.
Like properly disposing of cigarettes.
Right. Using caution when operating machinery that could spark a fire. and having a plan in place for evacuation.
So there's a lot that individuals can do to prepare and mitigate risk, even if they don't live in a high-risk fire zone.
Exactly. It's about being proactive and taking responsibility for our own safety.
And for the safety of our communities.
Absolutely. We can also support organizations that are working on the front lines of wildfire prevention and response, as well as those that are helping communities recover and rebuild after these devastating events.
You know, these fires really serve as a stark reminder that we're all connected to this planet and to each other.
Yeah,
What happens in one part of the world can have ripple effects that are felt far beyond.
it's a global issue.
And it underscores the need for collective action and a shared sense of responsibility.
Absolutely. We need to come together to address this challenge.
And while the scale of this disaster can feel overwhelming, it's important to remember that every action we take, no matter how small, can contribute to a more sustainable and resilient future.
I completely agree. Every little bit helps.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into these Los Angeles wildfires, we want to leave you with a final thought-provoking question. What can you, the listener, do to help?
Yeah. What can you do to make a difference?
It might seem like a small thing in the face of such a massive challenge, but every conversation, every action, every bit of awareness we raise can make a difference.
Yeah, it can be a little bit overwhelming, right? I mean, you see these images and hear these stories, and it's easy to feel helpless.
It's understandable, but I think it's important to remember that we can't let ourselves be paralyzed by fear or inaction.
Right. I mean, what's the alternative? Just giving up.
Exactly. We have to channel that concern that we're feeling into constructive action.
So how do we do that? Where do we even begin?
Well, I think it starts with staying informed and engaged, learning about the risks in your own community, even if you don't live in a fire-prone area.
Right, because this isn't just a California problem.
No, it's not. And supporting policies that prioritize wildfire prevention and mitigation.
Okay, so making our voices heard.
Yes. And I think most importantly, having those sometimes difficult conversations with friends and family
About climate change.
about climate change,
Yeah.
about our responsibility to protect the planet. You're right. We
Yeah.
can't shy away from those conversations. And it's not just about prevention and mitigation. It's also about acknowledging the human cost of these disasters
Absolutely.
and showing compassion and support for those who have been affected.
I mean, we've seen incredible acts of courage and resilience from firefighters, first responders, everyday citizens facing unimaginable loss.
It's true. Their stories deserve to be heard, and their efforts deserve our support.
Absolutely.
And beyond the immediate response, there's the long road to recovery.
Yeah, it's a long road.
Communities are going to need our support to rebuild and heal in the months and years to come.
And that's where the power of community really shines through, We've seen neighbors helping neighbors, volunteers stepping up to provide aid and comfort, and this collective determination to emerge from this tragedy stronger than ever.
It's a reminder that even amidst devastation, there's hope and there's resilience.
Yeah, absolutely.
So as we conclude this deep dive, we want to leave you with this thought. Knowledge is power. The more we understand about the complex interplay of factors driving these wildfires, the better equipped we'll be to address them.
Absolutely. We need to understand the problem in order to solve it.
So stay informed, stay engaged, and stay hopeful.
We can do this.
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the Los Angeles wildfires. We hope it's given you a deeper understanding of this complex and challenging issue and inspired you to take action in your own way.